I've taught for about 30 years as a part-time instructor, and I've been at City College for about 16 or 17 years. And unfortunately, I know too much about what's been going on at City College, but I mainly want to talk about what it means to be an adjunct teacher and put it in a broader context. And again, I'm sorry if I'm going to be repeating some things that have already been said, but let me put it in broader terms. We live in a capitalist society, and the goal in a capitalist society is to get workers to work as much as possible and pay them as little as possible. And one might say, well, teaching in a public school is not the same thing. There certainly are differences in terms of the work situation, in terms of the budgeting. In a public school, most of the money comes predominantly from the government, and that shapes what is and is not available. In the private sector, of course, it comes from capital and money made from selling commodities like goods and services. But in terms of the labor relationships, I'd say they're more and more like the labor relationships in a corporation, where they're trying to get as much work out of people for as little pay as possible. Partially, but just real quickly, administration. I mean, that's where the main growth has been, is with administrators. And, you know, we're at the community college, so that the tuition is still very low relatively to what it is at, say, UC or at private schools. But a lot of it is, there's been a swelling of the ranks of administrators. You have vice chancellors and provosts and on, and they get paid a lot more than most faculty members. So I'd say that's where a lot of the money goes, but hopefully I'll be addressing that somewhat in what I have to say. I mean, I can just give you an example at City College where I work. The administration right now is talking about how we need to increase productivity. I mean, that just sounds like a factory job, and what they mean by that is they claim, and I don't know how accurate the statistics are, that the average class now has about 24 students in it, and they want to bring it up to 34. So in other words, they're looking to get more work out of teachers. That's very detrimental to students because there's going to be less personal contact, and at the same time, the administration tells us they're placing big emphasis on student equity. That is that we need to do more work to make sure that those students who aren't as, quote, successful, and they would say predominantly Black, Latino, and Pacific Islander students, that they need more personal attention. When you've got bigger classes, you can't give anybody more personal attention. But their focus is on productivity, and it sounds like I almost feel like students are like the commodities we're processing on an assembly line, and we need to process more and more of these students and fill their heads up with what are now called student learning outcomes, where supposedly they are supposed to learn certain things in a class, and if you're successful, at the end of the class, they can take a test and show that they have learned those student learning outcomes. So this, again, another, like, what should I say, data-driven criteria for determining whether or not you're being successful. One of the things I recall hearing a lot about in the late 70s and early 80s was what's called two-tier contracts. And what two-tier contracts were is that you'd have existing workers and you continue to pay them at whatever rate they're getting paid, but when you hire new workers, you pay them a lot less. I had a friend who was working as a bag loader for United Airlines, and so they were taking people's luggage and putting on the plane all day, and they're being told, we can give you a pay increase, but we also want a two-tier contract. I don't know how that came out, but the way it works is that you're paying one group of people a lot less than the other group of people for doing work that doesn't take that long to learn, and usually the way the two-tier contract would work is that the new hires work for, say, 6 months to 5 years, and then they get bumped up to the pay of the higher workers, or the workers who've been there the longest. And that's a dream for management because it divides up workers. I mean, if you're working side by side with someone every day and they're getting paid twice as much as you do, you're going to have a lot of anger and discontent about that. It also enables them to make more money because they're paying a big part of their workforce less money. And it creates an incentive to get rid of the higher paid workers. And that's often resisted by these higher paid workers because they see the writing on the wall. Well, the notion of two-tier contracts is essentially what's been going on with part-time faculty even longer. In fact, I almost see the teaching profession as pioneers in fields like that because the use of part-time instructors in a big way really started around the late 60s, early 70s. and it's expanded tremendously. I was going to read you a quote from this article I read, but they said that back in the late 60s, most faculty positions in college were full-time tenure-track positions. They held about 80% of the positions, and part-time instructors held only about 20%. And now it's almost flipped, where the adjunct or part-time, those words are used interchangeably, account for about 70% of all the classes being taught. So that they had these two-tier contracts much earlier than you have, say, more in private sector or in industry. Another way that teachers have been pioneers, and I see this in, I would say, in the unpaid work. You know, there's a lot of emphasis nowadays for students in college to do unpaid internships for like a nonprofit or a corporation as a graduation requirement. Well, teachers have been doing that for even longer. It's called student teaching, where you work and you do the same job as a teacher, but you don't get paid. Now, again, you're in training, and it's useful to have that kind of experience, but it's just another way that I think that teachers have been pioneering these ways of exploiting people in their work situation. And I'll just give a personal anecdote. The first time I ever taught, I was a graduate student, and they had a program. I was in Santa Barbara at Santa Barbara City College, and I was given the ability to teach a class in American government, which was my field, at the college. I was delighted because this is the first time I'd ever have a class before, and the particular teacher I was doing this for was a full-time teacher. And he gave me the class, and like I said, I was happy because a lot of times when you get out of grad school, in order to get a job, they always have on these application requirements, they want you to have had experience. Well, how do you get experience without getting the first job? It's always like a catch-22. So at least I could say I had taught, a student taught at a community college, which is what my aspiration was, which was to get a full-time job at a community college. But this kind of shows you the divide between full-timers and part-timers. This guy was teaching full-time. He continued to get paid full-time, but I took over his class. And so he got that free labor out of me, and he got more time to himself. He spent maybe 2 or 3 times he came to my class to evaluate it. That was fine with me. I didn't need his presence. And to add insult to injury, and this is really getting off track, at the end of the class, he looked at my final exam, and I have to admit, there are problems with the way I pose questions. And he started criticizing them quite heavily. I guess he didn't like the tone of the questions. He said, here, look at my final exam. This is an example of good questions. He didn't know that I had the faculty book that went with the textbook that had sample questions, and that guy had used those sample questions as examples of what a good teacher does in terms of providing questions. So I found that really insulting. I never brought it to his attention that I knew that these were not his own questions, but that's kind of like that kind of indicates some of the relationship between part-timers and full-timers. So if you teach part-time, as you saw in the film, there's very low pay, there's great job insecurity. We have this 2-tier contract. They found a survey was done of part-time faculty, and they found that 31% of them are living near or below the federal poverty level. That's like twice as high as the national rate. And these are teachers. These are people with degrees, and people with degrees are supposed to be getting, you go to college to get a good paying job. And they find that, again, 30% of faculty, or 30% of part-time faculty, they have I'm screwing up my words. 30% of the part-time faculty are living at a poverty level. I mean, that's obscene.
What's the poverty level here?
About 15% in the country, and it's about 30% among the part-time faculty. And then a lot of them are on food stamps and other kinds of beneficial programs for people who are poor. So part-timers are super exploited by low pay. It really violates a principle that many of us might hold of equal pay for equal work, which is what the 2-tier contract is all about. Most part-timers get no benefits, or if they get benefits, they're lower than the benefits of full-timers. I mean, I'll give my example at City College. I teach 60%, so I've been getting medical benefits, which is big benefits, same as the full-timers. But full-timers get other things. They get life insurance. They get medical benefits when they retire. They get paid sabbaticals, and they have job security. Part-timers don't have job securities, as they pointed out in the film. You depend on a job from semester to semester, and sometimes they don't give you the job, and other times they will. We also suffer a lot of indignities, which somewhat came out in the film. I mean, for example, one of them, and I personally have not had this happen, but at most schools, if a full-timer gets a class canceled because they don't get a high enough enrollment, they have bumping rights. So you could be a part-timer who is prepared for a class you're about to teach. You start to teach it, and a full-timer says, nope, sorry, you got to leave. I need another class. Go home and go home without pay. So this is like one of the indignities. Another is an attitude of many full-timers, which it's not made explicit in front of part-timers, but a lot of them have a great deal of contempt for part-timers. And the contempt is that, you obviously you're an inferior because you aren't good enough to get a full-time job. And so you put up with these kinds of indignities that add to the stress and the discontent in the work that you do. Interestingly, came across a very good article on the plight of part-timers by Caroline Fredrickson, and I can give you the link to it. It was in the Atlantic in the fall. And she traces this two-tier contract even before, I was saying in the 60s or early 70s, to the exploitation of women faculty members. And let me just read this excerpt from her that illustrates this. She says, some trace the practice of hiring part-time instructors to a time when most schools didn't allow women as full professors. And this adjunct positions were associated with female instructors from the start. Eileen Schell, author of a book, I won't give you the title, notes that these contingent faculty members were referred to as the housewives of higher education. And how did it work? She said, she gives the example of her parents. My parents lived out that exact paradigm. Both professors. My father was full-time and tenured, and my mother was originally tenured track until a move accompanying my father got her only a non-tenured position as an instructor as part of a package created to lure my father to Stanford. So in other words, the father gets a job at Stanford, full-time tenured track. She doesn't get a job, but they make her into what they call the housewives of higher education. There, my mother worked with a cohort of part-time faculty wives who were given little respect and even less in wages. Women still make up the majority of contingent teachers, with estimates as high as 61%. By contrast, 59% of the full-time tenured faculty are men. I mean, that's one of the other big divides that is really only indirectly brought out in this film. And I assume Joe would probably have better figures on this, that the bulk of part-time faculty are women, and they happen to be disproportionately people of color. A lot of schools are putting emphasis on how we need, people of color teaching in our colleges. Well, the bulk of those positions that are happening in colleges are taught by adjuncts. So they're exploited as teachers, as they often are in other ways in our society. And then, as I've already mentioned, there's been this rapid expansion of schools flipping. So where there used to be a large number of full-time tenure track positions, now it's shrinking all the time, and more of these positions are being taken over by part-timers. And universities have other priorities. Who benefits from this? And I would say that the beneficiaries of the exploitation of part-timers are twofold. They're full-time faculty, and I know a lot of full-time faculty would not like hearing that, but that accounts partly for their higher pay, but the big beneficiaries are administrators. And you've seen the swelling of their ranks. They get bigger and bigger, and they make exorbitant amounts of money. I mean, again, at City College, the chancellor makes about $270,000 a year. They've got a special trustee who makes the same amount of money, and there are 3 or 4 other top administrators making over $200,000. There's not a faculty member who makes probably more than $130,000, and that person is probably teaching excessive classes. So that's been happening. That's even more so. You'll see that at UC. In fact, at places like UC, you have more and more administrators. And what are they doing? They're overseeing research and raising grant money. They're running sports franchises. And if it's a for-profit college, they're delivering profits to their stockholders. And again, that comes at the expense of adjuncts. I've done very little of organizing of contingent faculty. They're very hard to organize. And let me just go through a few reasons for that. And then finish up real quickly. When you're a part-time teacher, your attitude, and this is mine, you go and teach and you get the hell out of the school. You don't want to stay around. And if you're a freeway flyer, you have to get in your car quickly and go to another school. I've never been a freeway flyer, but as was brought out in this film, there's people who teach at 2 or 3 schools in the same day. They can't stay around at the school. And so you're less likely to have contact with other part-time instructors. In fact, even though I've been at City College a long time, I don't even know some of the part-timers in my department because you never see them. You often, if you're part-time, you aren't invited to meetings or you can't make them because of the demands on your schedule. And again, you almost never interact with others. And the thing is that makes part-timers also hard to organize, and I don't know the percentage, but a lot of them are people who are professionals in other fields, which is beneficial to the education of students to be taught by someone with practical experience. But I think the attitude of a lot of those folks is that they're doing the part-time teaching as a side gig. They aren't even that interested in the money. It's something more fun. And so they don't have a lot of interest in these particular issues facing, that I've been describing that face many part-time faculty. And so it just makes it much more harder to organize among part-time faculty. But the last thing I want to go through is why full-timers should be concerned about the conditions of part-timers, because their jobs are ultimately threatened, that it's going to be more and more pressure to replace them with part-timers if they are cheaper to hire. Again, they're expendable. You can hire them when you need them. You can get rid of them when you don't need them. They're almost, if you use Marxist terms, they're like a reserve army of labor. And as long as there's a lot of people who want these jobs, then that reserved army is always available to be exploited. I think there's also a growing attitude of, I've read a few articles about this, about putting more and more classes online. And I could be wrong, but my prediction is that when someone like a Jerry Brown is looking at education in California, and he sees, say, 120 community colleges, and there may be 200 or 300 people teaching the same class, like American government or American history, the attitude is, why the hell are we paying to have all these people teaching? Why don't we, and part of the rationale for part-time teachers is because the cost of education is getting so high that we need to have these people at low pay, but the money's just shifting to the administrators. But they'll say, we don't need these 300 people doing these jobs. We can get the superstar at Stanford or UC Berkeley to teach the American government class online and get rid of all these people, save us a lot of money, lower the cost of education, give people for community college tuition a Stanford or UC Berkeley level education, and then we'll keep on the existing full-timers to grade their papers, hold discussions, kind of like a teaching assistant in graduate school, and to answer questions that the students may have. But with online technology, we can even have the testing done online, and so we don't even need the teachers for that. And then you get to pay them a lot less money. And I see in the long run that a lot of full-time teachers are threatened by these corporatization of higher education, and this is one form that the threat will take. And so I don't want to end on a negative note, and sorry I can't create a more rosy picture. Maybe that could happen in our discussion. Thank you.
Not speak very much, because I think a lot of this stuff has been said that needs to be said, and I'd like to hear what people say. But let me ask you a couple of questions. How many people in this room have college degrees of some sort? Keep your hands up. How many people in this room have graduate degrees of some sort? Okay, 5. How many people in this room have taught in some way in the post-secondary system? Yeah, over half of those people, right? So this is a wide number of people. Over half of our high school graduates get some kind of post-secondary education. So this is not a niche issue anymore. There are more contingent faculty in the United States than there are steel workers, more than there are auto workers. Huge number of people. We're talking over 1 million people. So this is, yes, there's a lot of people. In some urban areas, in some metropolitan areas, it is the largest single industry, higher education, the Boston area. In the Bay Area, it's in the top 5 for sure. I haven't looked it up recently, but it's in the top 5 as an industrial employment sector. So, so welcome to our world, but not just welcome to a world of exploitation. There's also a world of struggle that is going on. I think the movie suggested that. It didn't suggest much in the way of organization, but there actually is that as well. And not just the traditional unions. About 20% of us are unionized nationally, higher in California. But also grassroots kind of organization that has resulted in things like international conference called the Coalition of Contingent Academic Labor. It takes place every 2 years. There's one happening next month in Edmonton. People from Canada, US, and Mexico. It's become international. There'll be guests from other countries because this is an international issue. The majority of people teaching college classes in the world now are teaching without job security. I just came back from 6 months in Vietnam. It's true there. And, but we have not succeeded in building a unified international movement yet, but, you know, give us some time. Let me suggest, this has been so a downer, I'm going to inject a little humor. One of my best friends, who was the leader, one of the main leaders of the contingent faculty called lecturers in the California State University system, right, which is one of the biggest systems of higher ed in the country. His name was John Hess. He died just a few months ago. But he was over 30 years a leader of the lecturers in that system and in the union that came out of that system, the California Faculty Association. And his line was, no lecturer is ever more than 15 seconds away from total humiliation. That we are all subject to that, even if, no matter what we teach or what our situation is, our insecurity. And another sort of joke that floats around, a contingent faculty joke that doesn't get told to full-time tenure-track people or administrators very often, is, you know, anybody without tenure, anybody without job security who says they teach their class in the same way that they would if they had job security is either lying or is too stupid to be trusted with a class. Okay. Black humor. I want to suggest, first, one of the other things that has come out of the attempt to organize is some institutions besides this floating conference. There's a group called the New Faculty Majority, which is an attempt to be an ongoing organization of contingent faculty nationally, which I encourage people, if you're interested, you can take a look at their website, newfacultymajority.info or .org, either one. Also, out of the CoCal effort has come one of the projects that I do for them for the last X number of years has been a news aggregator, pulling stuff together about contingent faculty and send it out on the email once a week or so. If anybody's interested, I would suggest that there are, one of the things they didn't talk about in the movie, and I'll stop with this, is that I'd say there are 4 reasons why this has happened, why good job has been turned into bad job, why casualization has happened as the leading edge of the corporatization of higher education and weakening of the
They used to call that outsourcing, and that used to be called
Right.
cutting corners on people.
Sure.
And you called it just now casualization.
Right.
Like that used to be called like sharecropping, like turning a slave into a sharecropper.
Although these were jobs that were good jobs. They were full-time, permanent, well-paid, benefited, career jobs. And so it's you know, it's the push, and it's happening across the labor force, but it's happened particular strength in faculty, college teaching, and particularly fast. I would suggest 4 reasons. 1, starting from the 70s, so it's been just one generation. Unfortunately, it was our generation, our working life, during the time when this happened. We're both, you know, not particularly young anymore. 1 was money. You hire people cheaper, you save money, right? There was a crisis starting in the early 70s of a profit crisis for the private sector. The rate of profit was declining. And in the public sector, there was a fiscal crisis, right? Because they were trying to run the Vietnam War and at the same time not raise taxes. So there was money problem. This was a way to get cheaper teachers. 2, the student population changed. So instead of having mostly full-time students coming straight out of high school, a large percentage of people in higher education now were part-time students returning as working adults, or out of the military, or women whose families broke up over you know, issues of the women's movement, people trying to renegotiate their marriages, or that kind of, all those kinds of things. The changes in the economy that caused people to need to retrain. So more students were part-time and harder to predict what they were gonna study. Harder for administrators to plan classes. So they wanted more flexibility, right? Just-in-time teachers. That's 2. 3, what else was going on in the 60s and early 70s in the society as a whole? There was a movement, right? A movement among black people, among students, against the war, and unions. There was a union movement on campus, very powerful, both in the rest of the public sector too, but in private and public campuses. Creating a 2-tier system was a way to frustrate that. And it has frustrated it, as people have talked about. And 4th, because of the struggles of the 60s, the pool from which faculty were drawn, namely people with graduate degrees, was not just middle and upper class white guys anymore. It now included people of color to some substantial, measurable amount. It included women, and that provided an easier political rationale to degrade the job. If it was no longer an upper middle class white guy job, but rather a job that other people had too, then it's easier to degrade it. The same thing happened with office work in the late 19th century. It used to be the way into management for white guys. And then it became a female job, and the invention of the typewriter, the job became a dead-end, low-pay job. So I would suggest that that's what happened. There's plenty of blame to go around, of course, from administrators, short-sighted administrators, political figures, business figures, full-time tenure-track faculty who ignored the trends for many years, the unions that they mostly led who ignored the trends for many years and did not develop a strategy to deal with what was rapidly becoming the majority of the faculty, now 75%. Plenty of blame to go around. But the biggest problems are not that. The biggest problems are like the same problems with organizing anybody: fear. And my suggestion that I have been working on for many years with many other people is a couple of strategic ideas, which I'll end with. One is that, like any second-tier group, any oppressed group, people have to pursue an inside-outside strategy. They have to organize themselves to speak for themselves, to make some pressure, and they also have to work within larger, more powerful organizations to create, to use some of that leverage. In this case, unions that we don't control, that are mostly led by full-time tenure track faculty, or in the case of AFT and NEA, K-12 teachers. So we have to pursue inside, outside, both. CoCal and NFM represent, and these contingent caucuses of various sorts represent the outside strategy. The inside strategy is the stuff we do inside those organizations to try and build the power of faculty as a whole, and also demand that our needs get addressed. The other thing is that as we work in whole regional areas, I've worked in 6 different Bay Area colleges. I've worked in other regions in the country too. We're not tied to a particular institution because we can't be and make a living. So there needs to be a metropolitan strategy, which is the same way the longshoremen, the entertainment unions, the culinary unions have all organized on that basis. The building trades, that's the effective workforce appropriate basis on which to organize. And finally, that is being implemented somewhat by the current strategy that SEIU is pursuing and the private nonprofit people doing a metropolitan area strategy, and has had some success over the last couple of years. And a couple of the other unions, including the Federation of Teachers and the Steelworkers and some others, are now pursuing that strategy in some places as well. I will close by saying thank you for coming a lot. And this is something that if people are more interested in talking about it, I'd be happy to be talked to. Get my card. I wrote a book about organizing adjunct faculty that's on the table back there. If people are interested in looking at it, $10. And I also want to make a pitch for another book that's on the table back there by Helena Worthen, who happens to be my spouse and also a contingent faculty member, but it's one of the few books that actually talks about how people learn what they need to learn to organize. It's called What Did You Learn at Work Today? And the forbidden lessons of labor education. And some of the examples come out of this experience of faculty, and one of them draws from the struggle at City College since 2012. And finally, I'd like to suggest I brought a flyer from an event that's being developed for Monday, August 1st, of a couple of our colleagues, contingent faculty members from Mexico, who are going to be here on their way going to the conference in Edmonton that I told you about in early August. If you're interested in that, it's just look at the website is cocalinternational.org. These 2 Mexican colleagues who worked also with the Mexican teachers who have been greatly attacked in Chiapas and other places, and are also labor educators, have worked with the electricians union and others, and have been involved in politics in Mexico. So they'll be talking about the teachers' struggle in Mexico Monday, August 1st at the Eric Quesada Center on Valencia Street in the Mission District. And if people are interested, then pick up one of the flyers about that. So thank you very much for listening, and I'd love to hear any questions or comments. I hope we've said something enough to spark some discussion or disagreement or something.
Well, I mean, in the movie they talked about like there was some kind of conflict between the regular tenured professors and these faculty, these adjunct faculty, as if somehow that the regular professors, the full-time professors benefited from that situation. But I think ultimately it's a threat to the position of the regular tenured professors. Because, I mean, if they have these other professors who come in who can be paid less, it weakens their position and really leads to the hiring of fewer tenured professors or fewer professors receiving tenure.
Yes. And one of the particular ways that it does impact them is that if you have very few full-time tenure-track professors in a department, all the departmental work of curriculum development, you know, all of the work of the department has to be done by those people, because all the other people, we're just paid to teach. And so the work of developing, you know, tests, all the kind of departmental work, and much of that is being pushed down by administrators onto faculty now, you know, but, you know, the consciousness of people in those positions is mixed. Some of them are just hanging on until they retire, and that's their attitude, sort of après-mort le déluge. Others have been sucked into the whole elitist attitude that if you were any good, you'd have a full-time job, because when I was being hired, anybody who was any good got a full-time job. Well, it's a new generation. The last 30 years have not been like that, but that attitude still exists. And then there are folks who are actual allies and who are grappling with what it means to be allies, and everything in between, and, you know.
I would just add a couple things to what you're asking. First of all, a lot of the full-time people were formerly part-time instructors. That's not uncommon. And one would hope that they would continue to have the attitude or be sympathetic to the part-time faculty. Unfortunately, some of them aren't. And I know that just my personal experiences at City College is that some of the former part-time faculty who now have full-time positions are resentful that they feel that their pay is, because we have, the part-time faculty at City College are relatively better paid than elsewhere, and they see that our higher pay is at their expense, which is a crock of shit, but that's what they believe, because the administration makes the bulk of the money at the college. The second thing is, I've always talked about how they want to emphasize free labor. Well, what I've understood at City College, I've never done it, I don't have the time, but the attitude is that if you want to get a full-time position, you've got to do a lot of this work that Joe was just describing, the departmental work, the paper pushing, and things like that, because that will give you an in to getting that full-time position. So it's another form of exploitation, and unfortunately, many of these people who do this hard work as part-timers, they never get the full-time job. But again, if that's your goal, you're going to do that work because, you know, that's the only way you're going to get the full-time position. So this just adds to part of my theme of what I'm trying to say. Do you want to follow up to your?
Yeah, well, when I was saying that, I would think that the unions of, you know, the full-time tenured professors ought to take a stand in opposing this hiring of adjunct professors, instead having more full-time or tenured professors.
Well, that's a complicated question. Yes, of course, on the one hand. On the other hand, it's important from our point of view that people not take that position instead of fighting to raise up the people, the majority who are now contingents and mostly part-time, right? If one only focuses on creating a few more full-time jobs, and you see what I'm saying. And then there's the question of who gets those jobs, too. Because the whole process of hiring is a process that is fraught with unfairness in many contexts, and is not, the hiring process, unfortunately, is not in most labor laws, is not something that you can bargain over. So that's a problem. People have made some progress fighting over those issues, but technically it's not.
And there's less incentive to hire them, and there's more incentive to hire more full-time positions. But it's just, I don't think that's the mindset of administrators, so it's kind of a pipe dream for that to happen, but that's how you create that possibility. Frankly, if I had my way, I think part-timers should get paid more than full-timers to make up for all the insecurity and everything else, but I live in sometimes a dream world.
Which is actually what happens with per diem nurses, because they're not getting benefits and job security, but work only per diem, per day, as nurses. They get paid on an hourly rate more than the regular nurses to make up for that difference. And that's actually normal in some jobs, but that's not what has happened in academia. Somebody had a hand in the back. Yes, sir.
A couple of things. I think I had a misunderstanding about the.
If you have tenure, I would love that. Then you have job security. You don't have to worry from one term to the next if you're going to be making a living. So it protects, I mean, it's kind of like at community college. I mean, some often say community college is like 13th and 14th grade. It's just like tenure for a K through 12 school. And it's not only gives you job security, which hopefully that leads to greater improvement, although of course it doesn't always work out that way. Some people take advantage of having tenure, they don't work as hard, but it also provides academic freedom, which I think is a big one. If you have tenure, it's a lot harder for the administration to get rid of you if they don't like what you're saying. So I would say it's important for that reason, and I'm just talking off the top of my head. I mean, frankly, if I had my way, I'd like tenure for part-time instructors. I mean, again, at City College, and there's more of this happening, is that we have a seniority system, so that does protect you somewhat, meaning that, although they've tried to take that away, meaning that the longer you're there, the greater your job protection. So when they start laying off people, they're laying off the people with less seniority, which is a problem because those are the people tend to be more women and people of color. And I also know that maybe I've got this wrong, but I think the CUNY settlement recently provided contracts for contingent faculty that would be good for a couple of years. So that's like a step. It's not tenure, but it is a form of job protection. And again, I'd be the first to admit that job protection can also lead to, people abusing their situations, because there certainly are, I think they're the exception, but there certainly are people with tenure who don't lift a finger. They don't do any of the administrative work that full-time faculty members have to do, and they probably use Scantron. They give tests on Scantron so they don't have to grade papers, which is time-consuming, but I think those people are the exception. And, but tenure's attacked because of those kinds of people. They'll pull out, one or two bad apples, and they'll say, this is why we should get rid of tenure, which is true. A lot of things. I mean, how is the rationale for getting rid of welfare? It was the so-called welfare queen, a black woman who drove a Cadillac to go pick up her welfare check. Well, that resonates with people, and so that creates a political atmosphere for getting rid of the whole program, which was very important and vital to helping protect not only the people on welfare, but their children. And you want children to grow up healthy, and welfare is necessary, unfortunately, for a lot of children.
Katie?
Tenure,
What? Let's go to the rest of the speakers.
I was just going to say tenure was always made to protect not just research, but also teaching and extramural speech in the community. And that's very important.
So, two questions. Are contingent teachers more prevalent in private colleges as opposed to public colleges? And two, how does the unjust conditions of your employment affect your actual day-to-day teaching, your relationship to your students, and then further on higher education that a whole generation is receiving?
Well, I can answer the first part. Contingent teachers are now the majority in every subsector of higher education, public, private, community colleges, even liberal arts colleges now in many places, which are going broke, by the way, private liberal arts colleges at an amazing rate. They're even the majority of people teaching classes at Harvard. Yes. And they don't advertise that. But it does vary some. The for-profits are almost completely contingent. Nobody's got tenure, right? And they're great big, shrinking a little now, but they're huge. After that, the biggest users of contingent faculty are the community colleges. And after that, four-year public employees.
Yeah, well, they're going to tax real estate for the sales of more than $5 million. So it is a tax the rich proposal. But given the context of City College, I've tried to write about this. There's a big problem with it. First of all, the administration at City College wants bigger classes.
This is probably off the
No, well, but it's part of what's going on. They want bigger classes, and so if there's more students coming in because of free tuition, they aren't going to increase the number of classes or the diversity of programs that they're eliminating. They're just going to have more students in each of the classes, and that's the way they'll use it. And there's nothing in the plan to protect it. It's also, for lack of a better word, I find it disgustingly chauvinistic, because it only is applicable to people who live in San Francisco or work at least 50% in San Francisco. And so that's going to create an administrative nightmare if they're going to police it, because that's going to require every student, people are against voter ID cards, that's going to require every student to prove that they live in San Francisco. And a lot of the people attending City College happen to be homeless, they happen to be couch surfers, or they're people who may have lived in San Francisco and some scumbag landlord evicted them. And now they have to move to Oakland. Well, they won't be eligible for this free tuition program, but the landlord who lives in San Francisco will be. So I'm very troubled by it and the way it's been rolled out. The main person behind it is Jane Kim, who favors charter schools, who favors corporate subsidies. She bragged about this in her discussion with the California Federation of Teachers when they endorsed her. And if it's really sincere, and I want to go back to what Steve is saying, we're supposed to be a wealthier country now than we were 30 or 40 years ago. That's what we're told, and yet education is a lot more expensive. Well, come on, if we're a wealthier country, it should be cheaper than it was 30 or 40 years ago when it was free at community colleges and a lot cheaper at UC or CSU. And that's why, Sanders, you may have had problems with him, but he said public education should be free. I mean, the wealth is there. It just is the priorities are that we've got to be fighting in the wars, we've got to put money into the military, into prisons, and bailing out banks. And so we're losing out there. One other thing is that the Department of Labor has recognized this. Job growth is not going to be in jobs that require a college education. And so there's a contradiction right now among those with power. They say, go get an education, you'll make more money. Well, when the Department of Labor comes out with its figures, they see that job growth is in services that at best require a high school diploma. It doesn't require a college education. So, why spend, again, a lot of it is trying to save resources. Why spend money educating people when there's no jobs for them? There's jobs for some, but not for a lot of them. And they're going to be frustrated as hell once they get a college degree and they have student debts and they have to work in Starbucks, which they could have done right out of high school instead. And so that's a problem. So on the one hand, I would put it this way, the student loan industry wants to expand. Certainly the educational institutions themselves often want to expand. On the other hand, there's a recognition that there aren't going to be, the whole idea now is to go to school to get a job, and there aren't the jobs for educated people. So I don't know how they're going to resolve that one.